She was not supposed to survive the night. The veterinarian who first held her said nothing. She just looked down at the tiny trembling body in her hands and felt the weight of something impossible. A gorilla infant, 3 days old, born with a condition so rare, so devastating, that the sanctuary's most experienced staff had never seen anything like it. Her limbs were wrong. Her breathing was labored. Her grip, that primal, desperate grip that every baby gorilla uses to cling to her mother, was barely there. They named her Maxie, and in that single quiet moment, in a concrete-floored medical room that smelled of antiseptic and damp earth, one woman made a choice that would change everything. Not just for Maxie, for every soul who would ever come to know her. But here is what nobody tells you about miracles. They do not arrive fully formed. They arrive broken, gasping, clinging to the edge of something you cannot yet name. We are going to take you inside that story, every terrifying hour of it, and by the time we are done you will understand why this tiny gorilla, born broken, given no chance, became the heartbeat of an entire sanctuary. The Lure Primate Rehabilitation Center sits in the eastern reaches of the Democratic Republic of Congo, deep in a region where the forest never quite lets go of the mist. In the early morning, when the light filters through the canopy in long pale shafts, the sanctuary sounds like something from another world. Chimpanzees calling across the treetops, the low resonant chest beats of older gorillas marking the start of a new day, the shuffle of caretakers moving quietly between enclosures, carrying bottles and blankets, and the patient, exhausted love that this work demands. It is not a glamorous place. The paths between enclosures are red mud, the equipment is old, the funding is never quite enough, but the people who work here, the veterinarians, the keepers, the volunteers who travel from across the world to spend months in this forest, carry something in their eyes that is difficult to describe, a kind of clarity, a sense of purpose so deep it has become indistinguishable from who they are. Maxie was born here on a Tuesday. Her mother, a 12-year-old western lowland gorilla named Amara, had carried her pregnancy without complication. The birth itself had seemed normal, and then the staff began to notice something was not right. Her left side was weaker than her right. Her muscle tone was uneven. When the veterinary team examined her more closely, they found what they feared. Maxie had been born with a neurological condition affecting her motor control. In the wild, she would not have lived past her first week. Even here, surrounded by the most dedicated primate care team in Central Africa, her survival was far from guaranteed. And yet, there was something about the way she looked at you. The first 72 hours were the hardest. Amara, Maxie's mother, had rejected her within hours of birth. This is not uncommon in primates when something is wrong with the infant. It is not cruelty, it is biology. An ancient, brutal calculation made in the body before the mind can intervene. Amara moved away from Maxie slowly, deliberately, and did not look back. The veterinary team stepped in immediately. Maxie was taken to the medical unit, placed under heat lamps, and put on a feeding schedule every 2 hours around the clock. She was too weak to suckle properly. Her grip was inconsistent. Some feeds she took eagerly, her tiny mouth working hard against the bottle. Other feeds she turned away entirely, her body limp and unresponsive in a way that made the night staff sit in silence and pray to whatever they believed in. Dr. Amara Diallo, the sanctuary's lead veterinarian, a woman who had spent 19 years working with great apes across 3 countries, later said that Maxie's first week was the most frightening of her career, not because she had not seen sick infants before. She had. She had held animals through their final hours more times than she could count. It was frightening because Maxie kept almost dying, and then kept not dying. Every time the monitors dipped, every time her breathing slowed in a way that made the staff reach for their phones to call Dr. Diallo at 2 in the morning, Maxie would stabilize. Not dramatically, not with any kind of cinematic surge of strength, just quietly, stubbornly, as if she had simply decided that this was not the day. By the end of the first week, the team had a clearer picture of her condition. The neurological impairment was permanent. She would never have full control of her left side. She would walk differently, climb differently, relate to her world differently than any other gorilla in the sanctuary. She would need lifelong specialized care. She would never be released into the wild, and she would need a human caregiver to bond with, immediately, completely, in a way that would define the rest of her life. That is when they called Josephine. Josephine Nakamura had not planned to spend her life with gorillas. She had come to the Laro Sanctuary 8 years earlier as a short-term volunteer, fresh out of a graduate program in conservation biology, planning to stay 3 months. She never left. Something about this place, the weight of the forest, the intelligence behind the eyes of the animals, the particular quality of the silence at dusk when the whole sanctuary seemed to exhale, had rearranged something inside her and made returning to her previous life feel like a kind of lie. By the time Maxie was born, Josephine was the sanctuary's head primate keeper. She knew every animal by name, by temperament, by the specific way each one expressed trust or fear or boredom. She could read a gorilla's body language the way a musician reads a score, instinctively, fluently, without thinking. When Dr. Diallo called her at 3 in the morning on Maxie's 6th day of life, Josephine was already awake. She had been lying in her small staff quarters listening to the forest, feeling the particular unease that comes when something you cannot name is asking for your attention. She arrived at the medical unit 12 minutes later. She sat down on the floor next to Maxie's incubator. She did not reach in immediately, she just looked. Maxie lay on her side, her small chest rising and falling with the careful rhythm of an animal working hard at the simple act of being alive. Her left hand rested open beside her face, fingers slightly curled, catching the light. Josephine reached in slowly, offered her finger, and that is when everything changed. Maxie's hand closed around Josephine's finger, not weakly, not tentatively, with a certainty that made Josephine catch her breath, made her eyes fill without warning, made Dr. Diallo, watching from the doorway, turn away and press her knuckles against her mouth. It was not a medical event, nothing on the monitors changed, but everyone in that room understood that something had just been decided. A contract had been signed in the ancient language that exists between living things when they choose each other. And you remember what we showed you at the very beginning, that image of a gorilla born broken, given no chance. We are still not there yet, because what came next nearly undid everything. The months that followed were a masterclass in patience and heartbreak. Josephine moved her sleeping schedule to match Maxie's. She was present for every feeding, every therapy session, every morning when Maxie woke and immediately searched the air with her eyes until she found Josephine's face. The bond was total and it was consuming, and it was by any clinical measure exactly what Maxie needed to survive. But survival and thriving are different countries. Maxie's motor therapy was painstaking. Each session lasted 30 minutes. The goal was to encourage her left side, the weaker, less responsive side, to engage with the world. Soft resistance exercises, gentle guided movements, toys placed on her left to encourage her to reach across her body. Progress was measured in millimeters, literally. The team used weekly photographs and video analysis to track the incremental changes in her range of motion. Some weeks there was progress, some weeks there was not. At 4 months old, Maxie contracted a respiratory infection that put her back in the intensive care unit for 11 days. The team that had spent months nurturing her fragile progress sat in that medical room again, watching the monitors, doing the math on her oxygen levels, remembering what it had felt like in those first terrifying hours when they did not know if she would make it to morning. Josephine did not leave the medical unit for those 11 days. She slept on a cot beside Maxie's oxygen tent. She talked to her constantly, low, steady, unhurried conversation in a mixture of English and the Swahili words that Maxie had grown accustomed to hearing. The other staff brought Josephine food and coffee and said very little, because there was very little to say. At 8 months old, a decision had to be made about Maxie's social integration. Gorillas are profoundly social animals. Isolation, even with the warmest human companionship, carries its own kind of damage over time. The team needed to begin introducing Maxie to other gorillas, carefully, gradually, with the full awareness that rejection by her own species could be as devastating as any physical setback. The first introduction went badly. A young female named Binti, chosen for her calm temperament, approached Maxie with what seemed like curiosity. But Maxie's asymmetrical movement alarmed her. Binti retreated, made a low warning vocalization, and Maxie, who had never experienced rejection from another gorilla since her mother's departure, who had spent the last 8 months surrounded by humans who treated her as the most important creature in their world, sat very still for a long moment after Binti left. Then she looked at Josephine, and the expression on her face was something that none of the staff who witnessed it could adequately put into words afterward. They tried again 3 weeks later. This time the introduction was to an older male named Kojo. Kojo was 11 years old, a gentle, slow-moving gorilla who had himself been rescued as an infant and had spent his entire life at Lorio. He had seen many things. He had grown into the kind of animal whose presence made other animals calmer simply by proximity. The session was held in a neutral space, a grassed enclosure that neither Kojo nor Maxie associated with their regular territory. Josephine sat outside the mesh, visible to Maxie but not inside. The team watched on cameras from the observation room. Kojo entered first, moved to the center of the space, sat down with the unhurried, deliberate gravity of an animal that has nothing to prove. Then Maxie entered. She moved the way she always moved. her distinctive gait, left side slightly trailing, her head tilting to compensate, her whole body working with a focused asymmetrical grace that the staff had long since stopped seeing as a limitation and started seeing as simply Maxi. She crossed the enclosure slowly. Kojo watched her come. When she was close enough, she stopped, looked at him, he looked at her, and then, in a gesture that anyone who has spent time with gorillas will tell you is not instinctive, not automatic, not something you can train, Kojo reached out one enormous hand and placed it gently on top of Maxi's head. Emotional peak. Slow down. In the observation room, someone made a sound that was not quite a word. Josephine, watching through the mesh, pressed both hands flat against the barrier, as if she needed to feel something solid. Diallo later said that she excused herself from the room, walked to the far end of the corridor, stood with her back against the wall and cried in a way she had not cried since her first year in this work. This was the moment we showed you at the beginning, the impossible thing, the thing that had no business happening given everything that had come before. Maxi leaned into Kojo's hand and stayed there. The session was scheduled for 20 minutes. It lasted 2 hours. By the end, Maxi was sitting in the curve of Kojo's arm, watching a beetle make its way across the grass with the serene, focused attention of an animal who has finally found the place where she belongs. The team watching on the camera feed did not speak for a long time. Maxi is 3 years old now. She moves through the sanctuary with a confidence that still surprises the newer staff, that slightly tilted gait, that left side compensation, that particular way she holds her head when she is concentrating on something. She has integrated fully into the sanctuary's gorilla group. She and Kojo are inseparable. She has developed a complex social personality, curious, occasionally mischievous, fiercely protective of the smaller animals in her group. Joseph still works at She and Maxi greet each other every morning with the same ritual they developed in those earliest weeks. Maxi presses her forehead briefly against Josephine's hand, and Josephine holds very still, and for a moment the boundary between species becomes something permeable and strange and quietly sacred. The sanctuary has begun using Maxi's story in their educational outreach, not as a tale of tragedy overcome, but as evidence of something more fundamental, that the capacity to survive is not always located where we expect to find it, that broken does not mean finished, that the most important things, belonging, trust, the slow construction of a life worth living, are available to any creature with the stubbornness to keep reaching for them. Dr. Diallo was asked recently, in an interview with a conservation organization, what she believed the world could learn from a gorilla like Maxi. She paused for a long time before answering. The kind of pause that tells you the answer has been living inside the person for years, waiting for the right question. She said, "The world keeps telling us that worth is determined by capability, by what you can do without help, by how well you perform." Maxi never got that message. She arrived broken, and she chose, in whatever way a 3-day-old gorilla can choose, to still be here. And every single day since then she has been teaching us what that actually means. We began this story with an image, a tiny gorilla, 3 days old, born with a condition that should have ended everything before it began, a hand that could barely grip, a breath that came hard and slow and uncertain. That hand grips now, firmly, surely, with the total confidence of an animal who knows exactly where she is and who she belongs to and what her place in the world is. Maxi was born broken. She became the heart of everything.